there is only the mind and experiences. And so we have experiences in the physical realm. We have sensory experiences. We see things. We hear things. We touch things. All of these things are happening, but there is only the mind and these experiences. So the question is there a physical universe that the mind is experiencing? Now we know that the mind is apart from the brain. The mind is not housed in the brain. We know that sensory experiences occur without the brain being involved. The brain is not necessary to having sensory experiences, and in fact, there are no electrical impulses going across the sensory nerves to go into the brain. Therefore, sensory experiences happen without the mind's accessing physical reality at all. The sensory experiences simply happen. They exist all by themselves. In other words, the mind has experiences, but there are only mind and experiences. So the question is, in this reality, who are we? We are the observer. It's also called the watcher, the experiencer, the eternal self, consciousness, the intender, and the mind. We have experiences: sight, touch, smell, hearing, tasting, emotions, and so on. The mind that we have is made up of the ego mind. That means memories, skills, attitudes, desires, learnings, habits, thoughts, language, choices, and identity that we have in the physical realm. And that's temporary. That is something which we will have now. We will carry that into the next realm of life. And then after a while, that will dissipate. And we have the eternal mind. That's the soul that's made up of our compassion, our love for one another, our feelings of free will, all of these things that will carry us through eternity. They will stay with us. We also have emotions. Those are our responses to experiences. We have joy, fear, happiness, guilt, sadness, contentment, pain, anxiety. All of these things are things that the mind experiences. They have nothing to do with the body, even though the body may respond or the body may show characteristics of them. The result of all of this is, because we are the mind and we have experiences, we create this reality. We create the experiences that we have. One of the reasons we know that our minds create reality is the famous double slit demonstration. Quantum physics has shown us that light can either be a particle or it can be a wave, and I'll explain what that means right now. In the double slit demonstration, if you can imagine a table, and we're going to put a wall on the table. The wall goes across the table and it's about maybe 10 inches tall. And then behind that is another wall, and it's about 10 inches tall as well, and it goes across the table. We're going to put a slit in the first wall so that you can shine light through it. When we shine light through that slit on the back wall, then you would expect to see a bright line that went up and down, a vertical line. And that shows that the light is going through and it's going through as particles. Now if we put two slits in that wall, in the front wall, and we shine a light through it, and you're just looking at the back wall, you're not looking at the two slits, just looking at the back wall, then what will happen is you'll see a dark band and a light band, and a dark band and a light band, a very unusual pattern. And what that shows us is that the light is coming through as waves, not as particles. So in other words, the light goes through those two slits, and when it gets to the other side, it diffuses, it goes out into waves and becomes wider and wider and wider. And by the time it gets to the back wall, you have two sets of waves coming out of the two slits. They're getting wider and wider and wider. And then when it hits the back wall, you have peaks and troughs in the wave. So the places where there are peaks in the waves and the light waves and the peaks come together, it's a very bright vertical line. And where there are troughs and the troughs come together, it's a very dark vertical line. And that's the reason on the back wall we're seeing this pattern of lights and darks and lights and darks on the back wall. Now that makes a whole lot of sense. You've got your two choices. You can look at the back wall and you can either see vertical lines that are very bright, or you can see the interference patterns where you have the darks and lights, darks and lights. But why do you see two of them? How is that possible? And which do you see and when do you see it? Well, what the quantum physicists discovered was that that wall where the slits are, if you look at that wall to try to see which slit the light is going through, then on the back wall, the pattern that you will see will be the vertical up and down bars, as though the light is going straight through each one of the slits and hitting the back wall. The light has changed into particles. So you know that's true because of the fact that it's hitting the back wall in vertical lines. On the other hand, if you look away or don't look at it, you just look at the back wall just to see what's coming on the back wall, then you will see the interference patterns. You'll see the bands of lights and darks, as though there were two waves and they came together and interfered with each other. So then let's imagine you look at that wall where the slits are, and you look at that wall, and on the back wall you're going to see two vertical lines. Look away, and on the back wall you're going to see it's going to be the interference pattern, light, dark, light, dark, light, dark. Look at the wall again with the two slits, and it's going to turn back into two vertical lines. Look away, and it's going to turn into an interference pattern. And you can do that all day long. What's happening is that when we look at the two slits to see which slit the light is going through, that changes the light. For some reason, the light then shows on the back wall as being particles. And the reason for that is that light responds to consciousness. Light responds to whether somebody's looking at it or not. If you're looking at it, then things turn into particles. If you're not looking at it, then things are in waves. We are creating the reality by forming it into particles. In other words, forming it into a physical realm, what we call the physical realm. And what that really means is that we're having the experience. So that when we look at something, we have the experience of it being there. If we're not looking at it, it's just not there. So what that means is that when we are not experiencing reality, our mind is not having experiences, then there is only the possibility of experiences being there. The experiences don't actually exist there. It's called a probability wave. When we look at it, when we observe it, then we collapse it, we form it into the material realm. And all that means is that when our minds intend to be in some situation, the situation occurs, reality occurs. We're creating reality as we intend for reality to be there. R.C. Henry, professor of physics and astronomy at Johns Hopkins University, summed it up very well in the Mental Universe article in Nature in 2005. This is what he wrote. A fundamental conclusion of the new physics also acknowledges that the observer creates the reality. As observers, we are personally involved with the creation of our own reality. Physicists are being forced to admit that the universe is a mental construction. Pioneering physicist Sir James Jeans wrote, "The stream of knowledge is heading toward a non-mechanical reality. The universe begins to look more like a great thought than a great machine. Mind no longer appears to be an accidental intruder into the realm of matter. We ought rather to hail it as the creator and governor of the realm of matter. Get over it and accept the inarguable conclusion. The universe is immaterial, mental, and spiritual." Now the question is, how do we create this reality? How does the mind have these experiences? Well, what we know is that there is nothing but mind, and there is nothing but experiences. We have the experiences of sight, of sound, we have the emotions, we have all of these experiences. The physical realm, what we call the physical realm, is experiences that we have of a world around us, but it's inside the mind. How's that organized? Well, it's organized because of information. There is information that creates it. Information is fundamental. Every cell in our body, except our reproductive cells, contains the complete information for the whole body. And yet not all the information in the DNA of our cells is allowed to be expressed or translated. For example, a cell from our hair also contains the complete genetic information for our eyes, brain, heart, liver, skin, and all of the rest of the various organs and functions of our body. However, in the hair cells of our body, only the genetic information for hair is allowed to be expressed. All the other information is literally blocked off from being expressed or translated. Atoms are made up of the same components, and yet they're organized into trees and mountains and rivers and people. Information is the basis that organizes the atoms. But the atoms are only our way of understanding the experience. If we go down into the experience of what we're having, then we will find atoms just because we're looking for atoms there. So then these atoms are what we have as organization that is beneath the experiences that we have, is created by the mind. Consciousness collapses the wave function. So it is the source of the information that creates reality. Our minds create the reality. This information that causes the physical realm to be accessible to the mind as it is, with buildings and streets and rivers and mountains and people, they're all in the mind, the larger mind, or the capital C consciousness, as Tom Gamble would say. We all share this mind, so we have the same experiences. Our expectations or shared perceptions give us the impression that the world is outside of us, but it's just that we all share the same information, the basic information that is building what it is that we experience. When you ask a person, what do you believe? You're asking for a self-report of those expectations or perceptions based on the person's best self-understanding. The person says, I believe a person shouldn't say damn it in public. Well, that's the perception that they have. That's who they are. That's something deep inside of them. But we have the same expectations and perceptions about the physical realm. I believe we are in a building now. That deep-seated belief is held by all of us, so a building is in our minds that we all share. We don't have to articulate it, but our belief is that it is there, and that creates it. It is simply created because we all believe it's there. We're sharing the same mind, we're sharing the same experiences, and so we have the feeling like there's some reality outside of us. But it's all just that we are sharing the same mind and the same experiences. People in the next plane of reality have what they expect to have, or what makes sense to them, without having to think about it. If they want to eat, food is just part of their environment. They don't have to ask for it or think about it. If they don't want to eat, it's just not there. If they want young, vital bodies, that's what they have. They have bodies in their prime, in their 20s and 30s, and that's characteristic of people on the next plane of life. Most of them are in their 20s and 30s. People who have a violent or cruel nature live on the next plane of life with others who are also violent and cruel, and the world is less comfortable. It's darker. It is not a hell. There is no such thing as a hell. But they are in a world that they have created that is less comfortable and darker. The earth realm doesn't have to have disease and tragedy. It is humankind's nature, our expectations, our perceptions, who we are deeply inside, that creates the negatives in our world, including creating disease. We create disease in the physical realm. There are other indications that we create our reality. One of these is the Maharishi Effect. In 1976, in 11 cities in the United States, 1% of the population participated in the Transcendental Meditation Program. The result of having that 1% during that period of time when they were engaged in it, there was an increased confidence and economic prosperity among people. There was a decreased crime rate, decreased suicide rate, decreased homicide rate, decreased automobile accident rate, the cessation of armed conflict, and a decreased number of fires. There are other indications that the Maharishi Effect is real. During armed conflict, the 1993 Israeli-Lebanese war specifically, group meditation resulted in 7.4% less crime in Jerusalem and a 4.1% decrease across Israel in general. In Lebanon, there were fewer war deaths and decreased war intensity during the meditations. 7 times they replicated this study in areas of armed conflict. In the United Kingdom, the town of Merseyside saw their crime rate fall by 16%, whereas during the same period across the rest of England and Wales, it increased by 20%. Merseyside moved from the third highest crime rate in all metropolitan areas in the UK to the second lowest area. There were 170,000 fewer crimes in Merseyside than expected over the 3.5-year period during the experiment, and the projected savings to the government was 850 million British pounds. In Rhode Island, many measures of the quality of life improved when they were experiencing the Maharishi Effect, including lower unemployment rates and less alcohol consumption. Canada also performed the experiment and saw lower homicide rates, lower suicide, lower motor vehicle accidents, lower cigarette consumption, and fewer worker days lost due to strikes. A large-scale study of the Maharishi Effect took place. It was called the Taste of Utopia Assembly. There were 7,000 experts in transcendental meditation who together meditated and focused upon world peace and calmness in the world. The result was increased harmony in international affairs, increased progress towards peaceful resolution of conflicts, more positive progressive statements and actions of heads of state, and of greater national and international support for their policies and leadership, increased confidence, optimism, and economic prosperity as measured by the rise of the World Index of Stock Prices, and simultaneous increase in major stock market indices, decreased air traffic fatalities, decreased war deaths, decreased traffic fatalities, increased creativity as measured by increased patent applications, decreased incidences of infectious diseases, and decreased crime. All of these things occurred during this period of time. The Maharishi Effect has been so strong and has been demonstrated so many times that the Journal of Offender Rehabilitation in 2003 wrote, "A review of 15 published studies conducted on our city, state, national, and international levels finds strong evidence that crime is reduced and quality of life is improved when 1% of a population practices transcendental meditation." This is all part of the program. Another indication of the fact that reality is being created by our consciousness is the Global Consciousness Project. There are 65 or 70 random number generators around the world. They show anomalies when the world is experiencing events that stir human beings around the globe. The results came when there was a bombing of the American embassies in Africa on the 8th of August, 1998, the Omagh bombings in Ireland, airplane crashes, the Swiss Air 111 off Nova Scotia, hurricane-induced disasters like the Casitas collapse in Nicaragua, Maguire's record-breaking home run, World Peace Prayer at the UN on the 12th of December 1998, and the United States Congress impeachment votes. All of these are indicators of the fact that our global consciousness is creating reality. We are having an effect upon reality, that it is not something which is outside of us. It isn't in a physical realm that exists independent of us. We are creating this reality. There are only mind and experiences. We are the mind. We are having experiences. And at the same time, it is the larger mind that's creating the experiences. There are only mind and experiences. We are creating our reality as one mind. We're creating it together. Now, these are the principles of this viewpoint. The experience is individual. I am having the experiences. My mind is experiencing things. Our experiences are similar for each one of us because we are one mind. Our minds are all one, so we experience the same physical realm, and that makes us believe that there is a physical realm out there independent of us. This reality that we've created is similar for each of us because it has been established by minds, other minds, over time. We have the feeling there is an objective reality because when we leave this room and choose to have an experience of this room tomorrow, the experience of the room will be the same. but it's just the experience that's in the mind that's the same. We also have the feeling that there is an objective reality because each of us describes the same experience. But we create our individual realities within the consensus reality based on our deep-seated beliefs. We just expect what we experience without realizing it, and the experiences come. Others have the same experiences. When we as a species change our deep-seated beliefs to have more love and compassion, our reality will change. Disease and suffering, they on the other side tell us, are not necessary. They will go away. There are other reasons we know that we live in an experiential reality. For instance, we know that psychics don't need to read someone's mind. They can simply have the experience of what it is that they're reading. They, for instance, can know a bill's serial numbers that the owner of the bill has no idea are there. But having the experience of the serial numbers is something which is out there, it's available as an experience, and the psychic can have that experience just the same way someone would if they picked up the bill and looked at the bill. Remote viewers don't need to know who created the target to read that person's mind. They just want to view a target, and they can view it wherever it is. The information is accessible. For example, Ingo Swann was able to remote view Jupiter and proclaim that Jupiter has rings, the same way that Saturn does. But no one believed that that was true. Nobody had seen rings around Jupiter. No astrophysicist would suggest that. But when Pioneer 10 flew by Jupiter, images confirmed that Jupiter has a ring. Ingo Swann was not reading someone else's mind about Jupiter. That experience of the rings around Jupiter was something that Ingo Swann could have independent of any other individual. Another indication that we live in an experiential reality. Blind people see in near-death experiences without learning to see. People blind from birth accurately describe visual scenes during near-death experiences. In the book Mind Psych, Kenneth Ring describes 83 of these circumstances in which blind people were able to see when the brain was not functioning. The experience of seeing was there. They had the experience. They didn't have to have a physical realm. They were also able to see in detail, sometimes from all angles at once, without everything being in focus. And they have a sense of knowing about a subject, not just visually, but with multisensory knowledge. The story of Sarah, who had cardiac arrest, and while she was completely out, her brain was not functioning, she knew, she experienced the color of the sheets, the scrub nurse's hair, the scribbles on the noteboard, and the anesthesiologist's different colored socks. There was no sensory input necessary. The sense was there. The experience existed, independent of having a physical body or having eyes. The senses, the experience was all by itself. There was no need to have some source for it. Another reason we know that these blind people seeing in near-death experiences had to have been because the experiences were there all by themselves without having any physical reality necessary for them, is that it takes 6 months for an infant's vision to be completely clear and develop a sense of depth. Visual acuity requires trained eye muscles to focus. Blind people don't have that. Depth perception requires learning to distinguish 3 types of cues: binocular, static, and kinetic. The retinal disparity between 2 objects that results in depth perception must be learned. Infants must develop a sense of size and shape constancy for objects, regardless of the object's location and orientation in space. That happens at 2 to 5 months. It requires that much time. The experiences of having vision are simply there. They exist independent of the brain. They exist independent of a physical realm. They are there, and a near-death experiencer who has never seen anything in his or her life doesn't have to learn how to see, doesn't have to go through what the infant learns how to see. The experience is there, and it's whole, and the near-death experiencer in the mind, which is always whole, simply experiences it. There are other indications that people have experiences that are independent of anything, independent of the body, independent of the physical realm. They're coming from the mind is having the experiences. Abba Goswami's Nomad is an effort to explain how people in near-death experiences can be seeing their own bodies that have sensory organisms to see but the experience comes to them even though the sensory organisms are not working. But it isn't just the sight sense. This is what he wrote. People who have these experiences report that they were out of their body and that their identity really shifted from the usual physical body center activity. Goswami explains that it is a quantum non-locality. The minds are entangled so that the etheric brain is having the same experience as the physical brain. But the easier explanation for that, and the more likely explanation, is that the experience is accessible. In other words, the person can have the experience, the mind can have the experience. Doesn't need to have a physical realm. There needs to be no physical basis for it. The experience is simply accessible. There are other indications of the fact that we live in an experiential reality. One of these is the placebo effect. A Baylor School of Medicine study was done. It was reported in the New England Journal of Medicine. The doctors were doing surgery for patients with severe and debilitating knee pain. There were 3 groups. The surgeons shaved the damaged cartilage in the knee of one group. They fleshed out the knee joint for group 2. And for group 3, they just received a fake surgery. That was the placebo group. All 3 groups went through the same rehab process afterwards without the nurses, without the people involved knowing which group was which. The results were that the placebo group improved just as much as the other 2 groups who had had surgery treatment. One example of a placebo effect was cited by Bruno Klopfer, an author. A physician named Dr. West was treating a Mr. Wright who had advanced cancer called lymphosarcoma. Mr. Wright learned about a miracle drug called Krebuzin. It was supposed to do wonders for lymphosarcoma. He pleaded with Dr. West to please give him an injection. Dr. West finally agreed. 10 days after the first dose of Krebuzin, Mr. Wright left the hospital apparently cancer-free. But then Mr. Wright learned that Krebuzin was not effective in the scientific literature. He had read some more about it, and he was devastated. It didn't seem to be effective, and so immediately Mr. Wright's cancer came back. Dr. West, realizing what was going on, gave him a dosage of what he called ultra-pure Krebuzin. And the tumors went away, they melted away. The fluid in his chest disappeared. He was perfectly healthy. But then the American Medical Association announced that Krebuzin was utterly worthless. Mr. Wright found out about what they had said, and he went into his cancer stages again, and he died 2 days later. That was the result of the placebo effect. When Mr. Wright felt like he was going to be cured by the Krebuzin, he became cured. When he felt like there was no hope, he lost hope, and he eventually died. And other indications of the fact that we live in an experiential reality are multiple personalities. Psychiatric patients who have a split personality or multiple personality can have one personality at one moment, and the next moment another personality comes in, and there's no way of telling which is going to come in. In one patient, one of her personalities was diabetic, while another was not. Her blood sugars would be normal when she was in her non-diabetic personality, but an instant later, when she had shifted into her diabetic alter ego, her blood sugars rose, and all of the medical evidence demonstrated that she was diabetic. And she could go back and forth like this, one instance having high glucose, the next instance having low glucose. When her personality flipped back and forth in a non-diabetic counterpart, her blood sugars normalized consistently. That could only happen if reality was created based upon her expectations for who she was. She felt like she was diabetic, so she had diabetic symptoms physically in her body. She didn't feel like she was diabetic, the diabetic symptoms went away. A psychiatrist named Bennett Braun, who was the author of The Treatment of Multiple Personality Disorders, described a patient named Timmy. Timmy had multiple personalities. One personality was allergic to orange juice, and when this personality drank orange juice, Timmy would break out into blistering hives. However, another personality was able to drink orange juice uneventfully. If the allergic personality was in the midst of an allergy attack and he shifted suddenly back to the non-allergic personality, the hives disappeared instantly. And there are many, many instances of the multiple personalities. The expectations, the beliefs of who the person was would change so that a personality came in and was that person. There was no doubt about it in that person's mind. And when the personality changed, their physical self changed. They were creating their own realities. Other evidence that we create an experiential reality are in Masaru Emoto's studies. He would take water and he would freeze the water instantly and it would form crystals. And he would have the water under different circumstances. This is an example of Masaru Emoto's work. This is a frozen water crystal. It doesn't look like a crystal at all, and the reason is it was from a bottle that had a label on it that had on it, "You make me sick." It was a very negative label, and the result was a crystal that looked like that. On the other hand, there was another bottle that originally had the same water in it, but on this bottle was a label, "Love and Gratitude," and the result was when the water crystals were frozen, the crystals were beautiful, well-shapen, symmetrical. This is an example of a crystal that was frozen from water from Fujiwara Dam. It was a municipal dam and it was polluted. This is what the crystal looked like before prayer. A Shinto priest came and prayed over the water of the dam, over the whole water of the dam, all of the water, and water that was taken from any portion of that dam then would crystallize into this form of crystal, just from that prayer that was formed over the dam. Reality had been changed. The water had been changed just as a result of the Shinto priest's prayer. It was the intention, it was the atmosphere of that prayer that created a new reality. This understanding that we live in an experiential reality, that there is only mind and experiences, explains some difficult issues. One of them is, it explains how we create a consensus reality. We don't create a consensus reality, we experience a consensus reality. There's nothing that's created in the sense of creating the objective reality. There is no physical realm that's created by consciousness. Instead, we have the experiences that we to interpret as being a physical reality. It explains how we can be individual minds, but we're also one mind. There is nothing but consciousness. There is nothing but mind. So we couldn't have anything separate from the mind. It explains how minds are repeatedly shown to be joined, even over great distances. It explains how minds can influence the physical realm, as in the global consciousness experiment. It explains the placebo effect, how the physiology of a person can change instantly just by their intention, just by who they believe they are, because their belief is what's creating the reality. It explains spontaneous healings, how somebody can suddenly be healed of something just because they believe that they can be healed. It explains the physical changes in multiple personalities. It explains materializations, such as Kubler-Ross's Mrs. Schwartz and Moody's grandmother. In Kubler-Ross's Mrs. Schwartz, Kubler-Ross was walking down the hall, and next to her was a woman whom she knew had died 2 years before. It was a patient. And she walked into her office and had a conversation with her. Raymond Moody had an experience in which his grandmother walked into the room. He had a long conversation with her about his childhood, about things that they reminisced together, and then she walked out of the room. That's only possible if we're creating this reality. It can't happen in the physical realm where something physical has to happen to make these things happen. It explains remote viewing. It explains precognition and psychic ability. We're in all one mind. Everything is accessible to us. All experiences are accessible to us. As a result of that, we can go out and get someone's experiences. We can get someone else's memories, that psychic ability. We can communicate with people living on the next plane of life. We're one mind with them. They're just living in a different vibration. So we are all one mind, and we are creating this reality that we are in. It explains how people who stop using the body temporarily, as in near-death experiences, have perfect sensory experiences. The sensory experiences exist all by themselves. They don't have to have a physical realm. They don't have to have the senses involved. They don't have to have a brain. And it explains why the brain simply isn't necessary. It explains the Emoto effect. It explains how water from a city reservoir, when frozen, can create misshapen, ugly ice crystals. But when a Shinto priest prays beside the reservoir, the water drawn from it freezes into beautiful, symmetrical, snowflake-like crystals. It explains how people's brain waves can synchronize when they're hundreds of miles apart. Since all that exists is mind and experience, anything is possible. We're creating the reality that we're experiencing. We're doing it together, and we're doing it as individuals. We are one mind, having the same dream together as individuals. Everything we are experiencing is our creation. If it's good, if it's bad, beautiful or ugly, comfortable or unnerving, we're creating it. It's our dream. We're doing it together, and we're doing it as individuals. And we can change that dream. We can change the reality that we're experiencing. As we develop our own love and compassion as individuals, we add to the love and compassion felt by the one mind. By every measure of love that we show to one person, we increase the love and compassion of all of humankind, of all of that one mind, to have a better world, so that the reality that we're creating is more loving and more compassioning by one measure, by one loving incident, by one loving gesture toward another person. We're increasing the possibility that all of humankind, all of the mind, can be loving and caring and compassionate. Virtually all suffering is what humans do to humans. When humankind changes, suffering will disappear. Disease and mental maladies will be eradicated. And all of this is true because of the fact that we are one mind and we are all creating reality. There is only mind and experiences, and we are the governors. We are the rulers of those minds and experiences. We can make of the universe, we can make of our lives, we can make of humankind anything that we want to make of it. Let's make it loving and compassionate. Let's live together in love, joy, and peace.